Welcome to the Equity Institute's podcast on the purpose of public education with me, your host, Vincent Perez. Today, we have Dr. Mollie Monahan on the program. Dr. Mollie serves as the founder and CEO for Social Justice Kids, where she works with white educators, parents, to really consider what it means to engage young people, especially young European Americans, on the subjects of race and racism. Please welcome Dr. Mollie Monahan. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Mollie Monahan. For our listeners, if we could begin, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to public education.
Sure. Well, first of all, Vince, thanks for having me. My connection to public education goes back to my childhood. So I guess my answer is in three parts: my childhood, my children, and my work. I am a public education kid myself. My dad was a public education teacher for decades, and still actually now in his retirement substitute teaches and teaches coaches in the public schools. And so that's foundational for me. My kids have been in public school as well. And right now I have one in public school and one in a Montessori school. And then, of course, my work centers public education. I do a ton of work, as you know, in schools and school districts all across the state and all across the country. So I get to be in schools and hanging out with teachers and kids all the time professionally, whether that's solo work that I get asked to do, or more and more often it's in partnership with folks who have different identities than me. We know the power of that collective, collaborative work. So
before we get to the kind of this big question of the purpose of public education, can you share a little bit about Social Justice Kids and how you connect with schools?
Sure. So Social Justice Kids is sort of the umbrella organization. And within that, under that, is the course that I teach called Love Kids. And Love Kids is just an opportunity for parents and teachers, particularly those of us who are white, although more and more I'm getting feedback on the content that it's content that's great for everyone. But we know for sure that especially our teacher population is 85% white women, and that our teacher prep programs are not doing a great job of really exposing our teachers to tangible ways that they can really engage kids around race and social identities and issues related to social justice and racial justice. The course that I developed, Love Kids, is really very keenly focused on that, filling that gap, particularly for teachers in pre-K-12, but also for parents who really want to be having that conversation with their kids as well. So we walk participants in Love Kids through 8 foundational units, which ultimately are really the 8 things that I wish someone would have taught me before college, career, and kids of my own. And so it's just been this lifetime of me fumbling through and figuring things out. And then folks started asking me, hey, can you teach that to us too? And so this is the more sort of formalized process.
You have me wondering about even just talking about race. I think there's a view, a perspective that to talk about race is racist.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think not talking about it is a disservice because it has such an impact on our lives. We're such a racialized country, in particular in the U.S. I'm curious about your response or thinking around that idea.
Oh, yes. I think about that so much, especially in the years following the heinous murder of George Floyd. You know, the pendulum has swung so far. We were really rallying summer 2020 around this idea that we need to be talking to our kids about race. So many parents and educators had this wake-up call, this aha moment that this horrible thing happened that our kids desperately wanted to talk about, and particularly white parents and educators found themselves ill-equipped to do so. And so folks were clamoring all over the country. I know I'm not alone in that sense that so many of us who are already doing this work around the summer of 2020 were called to sort of like 10 times the capacity that we had been doing before. So we had that moment, and now the pendulum has swung so far to the other direction, such that we have movements against talking about race. And so I think it does leave us pondering that question, should we? And my answer to that is a resounding yes. Of course, we must talk to our children about race. Here's the thing, our kids are already talking about race. Our kids are already thinking about race. What happens is that we, particularly those of us who are white, have been taught not to talk about it through this concept that talking about race is racist. That's false. And we can talk about that in a minute too. But that unlearning of our own capacity to talk about race leaves us as adults who are very nervous to talk about race. And our nervousness, when our kids ask questions, our nervousness and our shutting down of the conversation, our shushing of our kids, it sends a message to them. That message is that, first of all, I'm not a safe person to talk to about this. So don't come to me anymore. Go to, and kids will just infer, okay, then I need to go to somebody else. They won't just say, oh, we're not talking about this anymore. I'm not thinking about this anymore. Kids are curious by nature. They will go and find it somewhere else. They'll find the conversation somewhere else, whether that's another kid on the playground or, somewhere else. Or they'll just start trying to figure stuff out on their own. And of course, we want to be partners with them in their curiosity and their wonderings and their learnings about the world. And so we as adults need to do better preparing ourselves to have those conversations, relearning our tools and skills that we lost as children, particularly those of us who are white.
Two things that come to me. One is that I heard from so many students when schools were shut down, that when they just had, their devices and looking at, especially social media, how many times I've learned more about, name it, African American history or my people in the last 3-4 months. This is like as we got into when schools had shut down in 2020 in that fall. I learned more about this in the last 4 months in my whole educational career.
Yes.
So students were seeking, they're finding lots of great material and resources.
Yes.
The other side of it is the work of Resmaa Menakem, and you name this nervousness, and he notes this, like this charge in the body.
Yes.
And so that to me is why and I'd say more than talk, right? It's learning and engaging, but if we don't acknowledge this charge and this 500-year-old charge, right?
Yes.
This conversation is a charged one.
Yes.
So I'm curious then, if we get to this big question of, what is your perspective, especially from, you come from this angle working with schools on this very kind of, for some, an intense and for others, it's a painful, look and conversation, especially for those marginalized communities that have been harmed. We've seen, dehumanizing language really increase post-COVID. I've heard this from many principals and educators, superintendents, like the numbers are just up. Use of slurs, racial slurs, ethnic, also sexuality. And there's just so much vitriolic comments in schools, in basketball games. I mean, the incidents are there's a plethora of them. Knowing that, public education is for all, and this changing demographic of our young people, like schools have already shifted as more students of color in our schools than Anglo students. And so what does that mean for the learning for us all? How would you respond then to this giant question of, like, especially kind of within this frame, that what's the purpose of public education?
It's such a big question, Ben. I think that the purpose of public education is to walk alongside our students and lift their voices, lift their curiosities, encourage their curiosities, encourage their critical thinking, help them become the best version of themselves. Mm. And I think that right now, unfortunately, many models that we see out there in public education are making our kids shrink. They're not helping our kids expand their thinking, expand who they are, expand their understanding of themselves and others. And certainly we do need to learn math and reading and all of those wonderful things. And we can do that in a context that really helps the children of our communities feel seen and heard and held and encouraged. And I just, again, I'm in schools all the time. There are a few models that I've seen where I'm like, what? Like, this is amazing. This is exactly the way all public schools should be, in my opinion, right? But most of the time I go into schools and they're not. They're models where kids are being taught how to sit still and be quiet. And those seem to be the main two things that we want kids to learn in school. Sit still, be quiet. Sit still, be quiet. And that's just not how kids are.
Yeah, I call that really learning by force, almost compliance.
Compliant. That's right. That's right. And instead, don't we really want, or I guess I can't speak for everyone, but I want to see my kids, and I have found two schools that I love for my kids. And I think that they're incredible models for helping kids expand, letting kids explore the classroom, letting kids explore the campus, giving kids intentional opportunities to explore who they are as human beings, really embedded in the curriculum. And I don't see that very often, but it sure is fun to find those examples.
I'm curious about these examples, these solutions, right? Any specific philosophies or models, particularly, in your understanding of this purpose of public education that helps them expand and really engage, the community, who they are. What have you seen really work?
Well, first I'm going to talk about the Montessori model, which is not usually public, although there are some public institutions that use the Montessori model. And I think that most of our public schools are using a Montessori model through maybe first grade, maybe second grade, where the classroom really is set up in sort of like learning areas where the kids are able to go and go to those spaces, touch those things, go outside to play, but also to learn in facilitated ways, right? So we do have this in our public education system. It's just that we stopped doing it. In my opinion, we stopped doing it early. We should be doing it all the way through, right? So I love Montessori schools because of the way that they all the way through. Many Montessori schools are just the younger years, but we have many that are up through 8th grade, up through 9th grade, up through even 12th grade. And anyway, we can utilize those philosophies and we can bring them into public school classrooms. There's no reason why we couldn't. And to really engage children's curiosity. The big philosophy that I love about Montessori schools is this idea of following the child's curiosity. Noticing when a child is curious and interested in something, and then giving that child more space and more support for doing that thing, as opposed to sort of like, no, we have 8 hours or, 8 periods or 8 sections or whatever. And if you're not done in this 35 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever, and we're moving along, there's just more flexibility in that Montessori model. The other one that I really want to highlight is right here in Washington State. I really want to give a shout out to the Elements schools in Tacoma. So that's Sammy, Soda, and Idea. Are you familiar with them, Vince?
No.
Oh my goodness, Vince, they're so amazing. And they're public.
I do think about all these pathways, right? So if students follow their interests, I'll be going to hear more about this, but I've read an article about Tacoma schools growing maritime courses for the older students. So if they really explore what does it mean to have a career really with a C, right? I mean, there's something really, so I get up, I don't go to the class, I get up and I go to the water.
Yes.
Right? It's really something about that kind of experiential learning for young adults, right? But I'm curious here what what is this other model, or what's happening here in Tacoma?
Right. So yes, again, big shout out to the Elements schools in Tacoma, Washington, right here in Washington State. Sammy Soda and Idea, they are public options, and they're lottery system for students to get in, and students don't have to live in Tacoma to go there. So they sort of hold a certain number of spots for Tacoma kids, but then they also hold spots for out of district students as well. And it's 9th through 12th grade. And oh my gosh, Vince, I'm so excited to tell you about this model. I've had an opportunity to be in the schools and to shadow a teacher and just get some glimpses into some things. There are a few things that are really spectacular about these schools. First of all, they're almost treating the high school students as sort of like mini college students. They have a lot of flexibility in their learning and the way they're exploring the classes that they want to take. They do have the core curriculum that they're required to take, but the ways in which the teachers are teaching is different. It's so much hands-on, and I know we see that in more traditional model as well sometimes, but we're seeing it really deeply across the board. Sammy Soda and Idea are all the students pick sort of majors almost. So Idea is an engineering school focused on engineering. Sammy is science and math, and SOTA, SOTA, is the School of the Arts in Tacoma. And so they have sort of majors within that realm that they can choose, such that their pathway is, musical theater or music or some sort of art or different types of engineering or different things around science and math. And the students choose a particular pathway that they want to follow. And then the school sort of bolsters that pathway with the sort of requirements that the state has for math and English and things like that. Two of the most amazing things that I think about these schools is that, so I'm most familiar with Sammy and Soda, actually, and I do love that they're sort of, the students are out like on the town, right? Like the Soda students are going sort of building to building around that campus, around sort of by like UW Tacoma. And so the students really are having almost like a college experience, and that they have like 3 different buildings that they go to for their classes. And so it sort of elevates this sense of independence, and I'm in charge of my learnings. Watch me walk myself over to this other building. Let me stop at this coffee shop and grab some coffee on my way to my next class, right? So there's that's going on. Sammy is on the campus with the Point Defiance Zoo. And so they're in partnership. They're in the zoo learning, but they're also, Point Defiance Park is part of their campus as well. But they're right next to the zoo. They're up the hill a little bit. There are some portable classrooms, and then they are down by the water vents. There's another classroom down there where they're doing like underwater robotic and doing things where they're building these robots from scratch, not from kit, from like just materials, and they're guided, but the students build them themselves. They all look different and kind of behave a little differently, but their purpose is to clean these, I think, to clean the net, to make sure that the environment is healthy for the animals in that, for the aquatic animals.
This is what I think education at its best can do, is actually connect young people with real world problems. And that's something, a big concern I have. Like, what are our children inheriting? They're inheriting some major issues, from climate crisis to immigration crisis, right? Right. There are political issues, they're social, they're environmental. And so a school system that invites students to be in the real world, as we say, there's always this critique that, right. I think I just heard another thinker last week that, he didn't do well in school because school wasn't real. It's all this made up stuff and dittos. Like, it has no real connection to the world. And so if education is actually in the world, also makes me think of John Taylor Gatto, teacher of the year. I think wrote a book, two books I read of his some years ago. But this idea that all you have to give a kid is a bus pass, let them go and be and follow the interest and go, to the zoo, go to the, all of
That's
these
right.
examples they're giving right now. So, and my roots are in experiential education. Like we
Yeah.
learn by doing, we learn, right? Not just by sitting and thinking. And I give a whole lot to reflection time and writing, journaling, and
Sure.
processing. There's processing as a group, but there's also just the doing of learning,
Yeah.
whether it's running a chainsaw or,
That's right.
I mean, this happens naturally with like learning to ride a bike for many of us,
That's
right? Like there's so much happening there that mostly we're doing on our own and with our family, right?
right.
That's just such a clear learning process to me.
That's right. That's right. And hearing you say that is sparking a couple of other things that I want to share about the element schools that I just think is so wonderful. One is that they have a mini term in January. So the students are sort of like plucked out of their regular kind of school experience, and they choose one thing for a deep dive for all of January. And they go all day. It's just what they do all day. So whether they're learning how to sew and then donating those blankets to a homeless shelter, or learning anatomy illustration or something like that, they're taking like a really deep dive and they're learning. I mean, the other thing is that they're learning from people who do this professionally,
Yeah.
right? And so they are getting this sort of like, it's almost like sometimes a mini internship.
Yeah.
And they do also have internships with the community. So that's separate from mini term, where they do have internships with the community, where they are that absolute hands-on learning. The one other thing that is so exciting to me and about the element schools, and this is very much tied to what I do with social justice kids and love kids, is really tending to that social emotional, that being seen, being held, being heard every Wednesday, then all of the students across these schools spend time in what is called mentor groups for 2.5 hours every Wednesday morning. And they have the same mentor teacher all 4 years. So they have this crew of students, maybe like 25 students, that they get to know really deeply across all 4 years. There's sort of a built-in mentoring within the students as well. And the first year students get to watch, let's watch when the students get ready for internship. Let's watch when the students are getting ready for graduation. Let's watch, if students are applying to colleges or if they're applying to jobs or what they're doing and how they're making those decisions. They get to be part of that cycle of the 4-year high school experience every single week in mentor group, and having that personal relationship with one faculty member all the way through becomes so powerful. They get to know that child deeply. And so a couple of things happen. They're doing a lot of social emotional stuff there. I mean, the kids bring in food to share, or, they do like all sorts of great things. Field trips together in their mentor group. One of the really beautiful things, though, about the mentor teacher is that they're in constant contact with all of their students' teachers. And so they can see if a student is struggling somewhere, they can be in communication with that teacher and be in communication with that student and really have sort of a holistic perspective on what's going on. And they can see what's going on in the students' other classes too, while a more traditional model, a teacher might only see that student in one context for 1 hour, just for science or just for this or that. But this mentor teacher gets to see the student socially and out in the world, how they're interacting with other students in just this like social reflective kind of model. And then they also get to hear, okay, but how are they doing in outdoor ed? How are they doing in English? How are they doing in, all of the other places in their day? And so I think, oh gosh, okay, one more thing I'm going to say about the teachers get there. I had an opportunity, I was telling you, to shadow one of the teachers. And this was during sort of a really early orientation experience. They do like a half day orientation every month of the summer. So they'll have like 3 orientations throughout the summer, and then they have an overnight at a camp for the
Right.
entire school. But I had an opportunity to shadow one of the teachers, and there were things that she was doing that I spend months and years teaching teachers how to do. So her ability to just out of the gate with ease use every child's preferred pronouns, to notice the sort of nuanced ways that different students are engaging or disengaging, watching their, bodily, where are they in the space, and where are their eyes, and what, and understanding different cultural nuances to all of that as well. It was brilliant. I was not there as a trainer. I was there just to watch this model happen. And I was floored. And this is across the board. These teachers are so elevated in their capacity to really, again, see, hear, and hold these students. So I'm holding all of these teachers with a, special place in my heart. And I also know that all of our teachers have the ability to do this, right? They just don't have a model that encourages that kind of
Makes me wonder
depth,
about,
and they maybe don't have the training, or
that makes me wonder about their training. Like what are these teachers receiving? Or
that's right.
kind of elevating their skill sets. And it's also just a humanizing way of teaching, right?
Right.
I hear a few things in there, things like, like Avid at work. You have one educator for 4 years, or you can really build that relationship over time. You see development and growth and maturity. And the struggles that students, the real life struggles, right? I mean, everything from housing. I mean, there's so many issues we face.
Yes.
And then the near peer mentor in that, not really a way I don't work with middle school students without high school students. I don't work with high school students without college students, right? There is something very powerful about training, right? Those mentors to offer all of their wonderful gifts, to the youngers. I've been wondering about this model. So the Dare to Dream Academies, I've been on a project for about 11 years with migrant youth. And we do these on university campuses across the state. So WSU, Eastern, Central, Western, and to see what happens in a 7-day experience. And so they might be doing Math Academy or Science Academy or Exploring Your Future is the one I really work with, incoming 9th and 10th graders. And then coming 11th and 12th graders will do, a whole weeks of science, but they're doing so many. They're in the biology, they're shooting off rockets, they're in cadaver labs, they're in robotics labs on the university campus with all these amazing facilities and that's right to all of this. They're going to the theater, and learning about wigs, and that's a career, all of these ways. So I've been wondering about, like, what if in your 8th grade year, other models like this, right? So you had the 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks of science, and you're exploring. So you go to, it's all 6 hours of all things science. That's your day.
That's right.
And then the next is arts, and you're either building a set, writing a play, acting in the play, you know what I mean? Or making the music, or, just all the aspects then of arts and creativity, and all those aspects. And, so instead of chunking into a 55-minute, and then we cut that off, bell rings, and you switch.
Right.
What if we could actually have these times to explore? And then you're really looking at health and wellness, right? And that's the week or the session, the month where all the students are sore because they're like doing no workouts in there, but really exploring what does that mean, right? So I could just see these ways, of being right in this. So I'm really excited about exploring more about what's happening over there. Thank you for all of this sharing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm curious, like, what do you see really though as the challenges to moving into spaces like this or systems like this, and how to overcome any kind of obstacles that you see?
Well, we really saw the pandemic. I guess I should say the pandemic gave us this incredible opportunity to pause and really look at our educational system and see what unexpected learning we could do about how students learn and thrive and grow once we had to get really creative about how to do that in a remote way. And I think one of the things that we saw, particularly for our students of color, was that particularly for our students of color who were attending predominantly white schools, even for our students of color who attend schools that are predominantly students of color, still had predominantly white teaching staffs. often, right? And when they were able to, or we heard these stories over and over again, where students, when they were in their own homes, not needing to be in that environment of school, that they were sort of, their mental health was better when they were at home than needing to be at school. We don't want for school to be a place that feels oppressive to kids, such that their mental health is really being affected simply by being there. So I think, one of the, again, benefits of the pandemic is that we got to see that. We got to hear students tell us that over and over again. We got to see a pattern where multiple students were telling us that same story. And we were sort of shouting from the rooftops, like, let's listen to these students. Let's make some changes before we go back into school. And unfortunately, and so this is the challenge, I think, that I see too, is that even when we have such a clear sense of a different direction that we could go in, or a pain point that is so clear that we start getting hints of solutions, but when it's time to get going again, we just go right back to the way things have always been done for hundreds of years. And I think that is a real problem. I think that a potential solution to that is, gosh, there are so many things, but one of the big issues that I see when I'm in schools is that the principal at the school is not allowed to be a principal, which I see as a visionary, as a big picture person, as a person who certainly knows the students and knows the teachers, but has a sense of like, what do we want this building to feel like? What do we want learning to be like here? And that takes a little bit of spaciousness for that leadership to be able to have time to really sort of think that through and be in community with folks who can help sort of manifest that. But what I see is that with education budgets as they are, the pressure on principals to be everything else except a principal. So they're running around the school all day putting out fires that I think other people are probably better equipped to put out those fires, or maybe those principals have all of those skills because they've come up through the system and they've had all those jobs. But that's not their job anymore. It's not their job to go stand in the hallway with a student who's having an emotional meltdown. And I'm not saying that in a cold, crass way. It's not their job, right? What I'm saying is that people in schools have different jobs for a reason. And when you take a principal out of the principal role and have them stand and be with one student, yes, they might be a very compassionate principal. They might be amazing with students. And that time and emotional labor that principal is being asked to do for an hour or more sometimes at a time is taken away from the benefit of that entire building, when that principal could be doing that work of the big picture for that building. So I really see principals stretched so thin across the board and not able to do the jobs that they really signed up for and would be great at. The other thing I think too that I see as a problem within many of our schools is that even when they want to make big change, even when they want to have a core group of, say, for example, for working with me, even if they do want to have a core group of their teachers go through Love Kids, they really probably only have 4 1-hour-long opportunities per semester, per term, to do that work. And Vince, you and I know that this work is like ongoing practice. It's not I'm going to go to a 1-hour training this month and that's going to be effective. Yeah. And so I really think that major shift where teachers are able to have, again, more space to do that critical learning and development themselves, to do some personal work on themselves so that they can show up better. I think our teachers' mental health would be served by that too. Love Kids is one example, but one of the things that I hear from participants in Love Kids all the time is like, I love coming here, right? We hear so much about the resistance to DEI training, right? Love Kids, I guess, is technically DEI training. But what I hear so often from participants of Love Kids is like, I love coming here. You make me feel, Mollie, you make me feel seen and heard and held as a teacher. I feel this is my me time. I get to think about myself as a whole human being, right? When I come to my Love Kids sessions. And yes, I'm talking about my students. And yes, I'm talking about my colleagues. But this is like a whole person experience that we're doing here. And so it's learning, but it's also healing and it's connecting and it's seeing each other clearly and fully. So I think that we hear so much like, oh, we don't have time for that. Oh, we don't have time for that. My thought is we don't have time not to. That we have kids whose mental health is being really harmed in our schools right now. And we have teachers who don't have the capacity to show up for that. And so we must pause, right? The pandemic taught us to pause in some ways. We must do that again instead of just charging forward to do the things that we're not even clear about why we're doing them. We're just filling the hours of the day. I think like slow it down. We will all get so much more out of it if we slow it down and say, like, what do we really need? Like, take a breath and be okay. Right?
You identify so many issues, right? Which ultimately there's a funding component, whether that's time, what does that mean? How do we get teachers more time with each other for their own well-being? I really think healthy teachers, healthy students.
Yes.
So the rubber banding back to status quo post-COVID without really asking, what did we learn? I'm still holding this question. What did we learn from COVID?
Yeah.
Schools, right? I think that might be the next podcast. I think that's a rich question that was going to derive some key answers about how to shift and change. I'm curious here if you had any calls to action for our listeners. Like what would you want folks to think about doing, right?
Well, gosh, I was certainly spending some time thinking about this ahead of time, and there's a mountain of things that I would love for our listeners to do. I think, I'll give like a couple of classroom tips that are really easy, like what we like to call like low-hanging fruit, right? So that teachers could like just go out and do this right away. And one of those things is, and I do a lot of work in elementary schools, but you can take these and extrapolate them on up. But you'll see behind me, Vince, is the Social Justice Kids Library. And this is our teaching library here at Social Justice Kids that we use with parents and educators to sort of give us tools for talking about hard things with kids, whether that's race, social identity, gender identity, all the things. So I think books are just such a wonderful way to sort of enter that. And I want to just share a couple of books really quickly so that I can give some examples of, what I mean when I want for us to have certain books in our classrooms, or what to look for in a book that I'm talking about, right? So we want to make sure that we have representation of different racial, social identities, ethnic identities, and we want to make sure that those books are written by the people that are in them, right? So here we have The Proudest Blue. This is called this is a story of hijab and family, right? And this book was written by Ibtaj Muhammad, right? And one of the things that I love to do is give kids an opportunity to see who their author is too. And so many times children's books, but books for older kids and adults as well, will show you who the author is and give you some information about the author as well, which I think is so great to sort of like humanize books. This is another great example, Don't Touch My Hair, which is something that we see happening to our, kids of color in schools all the time. At a base level, let's make sure that all of our students know that we don't touch each other's bodies without permission. That's just not something that we do, period. But there's also this extra thing, particularly for girls of color, where people just feel like they can reach out and touch their hair. So I do love this book for that. But I also love, again, going back and we're gonna, meet the author, and we're gonna see why she wrote this book, because she had this experience growing up where, and even as an adult, right? And so we get to humanize. I also think it's so important for us to, when we're talking about Native and Indigenous identities and communities, one of the things that we know for sure happens in schools is that teachers are often talking about Native folks, Indigenous folks in the past tense, as if they don't exist currently today. And so we need to bring examples of current day stories by current day humans, right, into our classrooms. And so while this one is a little bit dated, it's still only a couple of decades old. And I always have to laugh because we get to talk to kids. You'll see what I mean in a second here, Vince. But
it's called Jingle Dancing?
Jingle Dancer, yes, by Cynthia Ladick Smith. And so she's learning this, kiddo is learning her jingle dance from a videotape and a VCR. Right? So, and you see this Native kiddo in her living room. I don't think we get a lot of opportunities to have our students understand. I mean, I think a lot of our students go all the way through pre-K 12 thinking that Native and Indigenous folks live in teepees, right? I mean, and so it's here we are, and let's go we'll go and practice our jingle dance in our neighborhood. We're going to go see Auntie, who has just come home from the law firm where she works, right? So I just think we need to have these examples as well. And of course, books that kids actually like to read. So any book that I recommend has already been put through the test by my own two white kids. They love these books, and we'll go back to these books over and over again. So I think that's one, sort of when we talk about low-hanging fruit. I just gave your listeners a great example. So we're Don't Touch My Hair by Sherry Miller, if people are just listening audio. The Proudest Blue by Ibtaj Muhammad, and then Jingle Dancer by Cynthia Ladick Smith. But folks are welcome to reach out to me on Instagram or whatever too. I'm at Dr._Mollie M. And I'm happy to share more titles that I love. So I think that's one of the things that I would say is a call to action, is just making sure that our classrooms and our curriculums are filled with people who look like our students and who share their experiences, not just for those students, but for all students to have exposure to all identities and all lived experiences, right? So that's one thing. The other thing, and this is hard, Resma Menachem might name that some vibrations might go up when people listen to this next one, but I really would love for us to sort of take a breath and take a beat and really, really hear this next one, because I think it is one of the most important solutions that we have out there. And this is my call out to my fellow white women who are parents, who are teachers, who care about this stuff, right? So these are the people who are going to be listening to your podcast, who might think, I'm here listening to Vince's podcast. I'm one of the good ones, right? What I really want for all of us to do is to pause and consider how we might be participating in the systems that we say we want to dismantle. We so often, as the quote unquote good white people, we so often find ourselves pointing over there at the bad people who need to get it together. And so my big call to action is, instead of pointing over there where you don't have control, come back in here and go deeper, get more curious about what additional growth you have to do. I am here to say that as a white woman who has been professionally engaged in teaching and DEI and social justice stuff professionally for well over 20 years, close to 30 years, I learn every day. I trip up every day. I mess up every day in ways that are astounding to me sometimes. Like, wow, what in the world is the matter with me? But if we don't get humble and curious and capable of like noticing those moments and taking those moments as an opportunity to learn and grow and do better and be better, how can we ever ask those people over there, those bad people over there, to change if we aren't even willing to say, like, I have room to change? I have room to grow. I don't know everything yet. I have ways that I can be better too. And in my process of becoming better and doing better, my capacity grows to change everything around me as well. So I think those are my two things. Let's get some really cool books in the classroom, and let's do some deep introspection. For those of us who are white, particularly those of us who are white women, are we really as arrived as we think we are, or do we still have a lot to learn and grow and do and be better?
Thank you so much. That's a big call, right? That's,
Big.
There's really something about that self-reflection. It's the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yes.
As a cis het Chicano man, like, is actually looking in the mirror. And I think even further, examining harm that we do.
Yes, Vince. Yes.
To accountability and the rest, right? I think that's like next level too, and introspection, as well as an analysis of harm, right?
Oh my gosh, Vince, can we just take a breath on that for a minute? I want to underscore that, Vince, the harm. So this is just me taking a minute to like speak directly to the women out there who are like me, right? I know you because I am you, and we do cause harm. So please, sisters, let's get humble and curious and clear and aware of when, not if, when we cause harm. Because if we can't notice when we are causing harm, we can't change anything else. We have to start inside ourselves.
And I think ultimately this is liberatory work, right? It is
Yes.
freeing. It is freeing.
So freeing.
To acknowledge and be accountable in this way.
I think that's so right, Vince. I talk about it as sort of like, and again, it's like, I know us because I am us, white women, right? That my life was lived and sometimes still is often lived in like sort of two silos, how I say I am and how I actually am. And what our work is, I believe, as white women, is to bring those two things together, really get our values in alignment with our actions. Because right now they're out here, they're not together. Or every once in a while they come together, but they're mostly like not, right? Just to more often have our values in alignment with our actions, and to keep moving toward that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really, really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much, Vince. Me too. Thanks for having me.